Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today we are going to be looking at the newest collection from Cracked called Glazed and Glossy. This is basically a continuation of their donut shop collection from last year, which featured these almost pearlescent polishes, just in some new colors. And I also have the new Jelly of the Month to share with you all. So as always, I will save more of my thoughts for the end after comparisons. For now, let's just get into the swatches. The first polish in the collection is Raspberry Glaze, and this one is just described as a muted raspberry with the classic oyster pearl glow formula, which is basically what Cracked is calling their glazed polish line. As you can see, the formula on this one was super full coverage on the first coat alone. I was actually really impressed with the coverage. I wouldn't call it a one coater exactly, like there is still some sheerness where you can still see through to your nail line underneath, but overall it was just a lot more pigmented than I was expecting it to be. It definitely does have this muted, somewhat darker pink raspberry color, which I think is pretty, and obviously it's packed with that oyster pearl kind of shimmer, which makes it a little pearlescent but not super brushstrokey like typical pearl polishes. But I still was careful with my application to apply it as straight as possible. Next up we have Baker's Dozen, which is described as a warm nude pink. So I really loved how it looked in the bottle, but on the nail I feel like it just lightened up so much. I mean, I guess it's that super pearlescent glow that makes it lean a bit more icy, so it doesn't really read as a warm pink, at least not to me. But I still found that I really love this shade. It's just like so elegant and classy. I feel like this could totally work as like a bridal color. I don't know if that's controversial to say, because again, I know these types of finishes are just so divisive, but I don't know, there's just something like so refined about this shade and finish. The formula on this one was super smooth, easy to apply and work with. It was a bit sheer on the first coat, especially compared to Raspberry Glaze, because obviously this is super light in color, but I still found it opaque enough for me on 2 coats. Next we have Lilac Frosting, and this one is just described as a lilac, which I guess, to be fair, is accurate. I actually really love this shade. This is probably my second favorite, or tied for first with Baker's Dozen. I just love this like super pale purple shade. It's just so delicate, so lovely for spring. It again had a really great formula that was very full coverage and very pigmented, just like, you know, a little bit sheer where you still see some nail line, but I personally found it opaque for me on 2 coats. Even for my full hand swatch, which is shown in direct sunlight, I couldn't really see any visible nail lines, so I would call this shade, and honestly just the rest of the collection, solid 2 coaters, but of course that can always depend on your nail length and your application. Next we have Don't Eat That, and this is a dirty gray green. So I knew this was going to be my least favorite, unfortunately. I was a little hopeful because it was like sort of a sage green color, but there definitely is this like dingy element to the shade that, you know, kind of makes it into that prugly category, at least for me, which, you know, isn't always my favorite. I think if it didn't have that like grayish undertone, I probably would have liked it a lot more, but it is funny, especially paired with the name and, you know, thinking of like a moldy donut. Like, obviously it is also kind of gross, but I do appreciate that Monique is gonna take that sort of concept but just make it fit with like a very pretty sort of finish, you know? So definitely let me know what you think of this shade specifically, because I feel like, you know, it can work, I just don't love it on me. The next polish we have is Baked Blue, and this one is described as a dreamy, soft blue, which I thought was so interesting because I personally just wouldn't call this shade of blue soft. If it was much lighter or like more pastel, kind of similar to the previous 3 shades, then the description would make sense for me, but this is definitely like a much more vibrant kind of blue color, a little bit more similar to Raspberry Glaze, but maybe not as muted. But either way, however you want to describe this color, the formula was super impressive. Again, very similar to Raspberry Glaze, where it was just super highly pigmented, very full coverage on the first coat alone, but not quite a one coater, though I would call this one a solid two coater. I can't imagine people needing 3 for this one just because it is a little bit deeper in color compared to the previous 3 shades. I thought this was such a fun pop of color. I just really appreciated how bright it was. And rounding out the collection, we have Licker-licious, which is described as a rich black with the same oyster pearl glow finish. Now, you know me, I am a seasonal wearer through and through, so I normally would not care to wear a black polish in like spring or summer, but I was actually really excited for this one. I loved how it looked in the bottle, just having this like really cool black pearl kind of look. But for whatever reason, I didn't end up loving it on the nail. I feel like it just didn't translate the way that I was expecting it to, where the pearlescent effect is still there, but it is like much more subtle, likely because it's in a black base that is like very pigmented, so it probably, you know, swallows up some of that pearly glow. So I feel like it doesn't really look as pearlescent as the other polishes in the collection. It just kind of softens the base color in a different way. It's very subtle, but I don't know, it's just what I noticed. And here is the collage of my full hand swatches of the collection, again worn in 2 coats each with top coat in direct sunlight. Obviously I'm more partial to the top 3 shades, but I do appreciate the pops of color with the bottom 3 because it just makes for a more interesting color palette. And the last shade I have is the jelly of the month, which is called Breakfast at Monique's, which is obviously a Tiffany blue jelly. So no surprise, I love the color of this one so much, and the formula was okay. I think I would say this one falls more on the milky jelly spectrum, where you can see here on the first coat there is like a decent amount of pigmentation that kind of like obscures the nail line. It's not super glassy looking, but it still has that squishiness that jelly polishes normally do. The problem that I had with it was that it was like a little bit patchy on that first coat, though it did end up self-leveling pretty well, especially after the second coat when I had to apply a little bit more polish on one of the corners that was looking a little bare. You still could obviously see my nail line because this is going to be that squishy jelly kind of formula, but I still wanted to try to do a third coat just to kind of see how that looks, and it basically became like full coverage. Though for my full hand swatch I did just do 2 coats, and I feel like the visible nail line is just so minimal. Like even in direct sunlight it was really hard to make anything out, so it definitely is very passable on just 2 coats. Now for comparisons, I wanted to quickly show Raspberry Glaze next to Pink Velvet because I thought these were going to be a lot closer, but you can just see how much darker and more muted Raspberry Glaze is. I thought maybe it would be closer to ILNP's Pink Suede, but that one's still a little too light and muted. So if anything, color-wise, it's maybe the closest to something like Holo Taco's Pop Rocker, but that one obviously has a very different finish. So for Baker's Dozen, I thought I could show this one next to Pink Velvet, which obviously Pink Velvet does look a little bit darker, a little bit more noticeably pink, but on the nail, at least in certain angles, they kind of do look similar because of that strong pearlescent glow, though I do think you still can tell that Pink Velvet is pink. So because Baker's Dozen leans a little bit more in like that beige category, I figured I could show it next to some other similar shades like Cinnamon Sugar Crumb or Donut Spunk, both of which are also the pearly glazed kind of finishes. And I would say that Cinnamon Sugar Crumb is definitely the most noticeably different, but Donut Spunk was like surprisingly similar, though in certain angles again you definitely can tell it has a much brighter like off-white colored base. I have a quick bottle comparison for Mooncat's Aphrodisiac, which is a very light, shimmery kind of pink sheer. That one though is more of like a noticeable cotton candy pink with like a blue shimmer, so they are very different. When it comes to that more muted pink with the silver kind of shimmer, I figured I could show this one next to ILNP's Pink Suede since it matches a lot closer in the bottle, but on the nail, ILNP is definitely a lot darker. The silver shimmer is a bit different because it's a magnetic pigment, so it's not as densely packed as a pearlescent finish. Next for Lilac Frosting, I wanted to quickly show this next to Cutie Patootie from the Catchphrase collection last month. I knew these weren't going to be dupes because they're very different finishes, but just for color reference. And similar to the last shade, I did also want to compare this to ILNP's Lily, which was the purple magnetic, but this is more of a blue toned purple, so definitely very different color wise. I thought it would be better to show some of the ILNP Eternal shades next to Lilac Frosting, since they have this very icy kind of look to them, but those are metallics instead of pearlescent, so they do look a little different, not to mention they're also a little darker. I have a few more bottle comparisons. This next one is Mooncat's Poisonberry, which is a very sheer kind of lavender purple, but that one's a lot brighter in its color and also has this blue shimmer. It's maybe a little more blue leaning too. And lastly, I have Cirque Colors Ohana and Porcelain Plum, both of which are these shimmer formulas that can kind of look a little pearlescent, but Ohana is a little too blue toned. I think Porcelain Plum is probably the closest to that base color, but obviously it has like this pink shimmer and a hollow sparkle. Then for Don't Eat That, here's a quick look at it next to Like a Retro Dream and Spring Sprout, both of which are these shimmery kind of light greens, but as you can tell they are a lot brighter or maybe a little bit blue toned, so definitely very different and unique compared to Don't Eat That. And here's a quick look at it next to ILNP's Velour, which is from that same Velvet collection. So aside from it being a magnetic, I thought these were going to be more similar, but Velour is actually a little bit brighter or more saturated in its green color. Next for Baked Blue, the closest other cracked blues that I have are PB and Blue Jay, which is obviously a lot lighter, a lot more gray toned as well, and Nuclear Coolant, which is the complete opposite, where it's so much brighter, almost like a neon blue. I actually thought this shade kind of reminded me of ILNP's 0 Degrees, which is another magnetic from them. So obviously it's going to have a totally different look to it, but I just thought color-wise it was kind of similar, but I think they look more similar in the bottle than they do on the nail. On the nail, I think you can tell that 0 Degrees is just a bit darker and more teal leaning. Then for Licker-licious, I knew I had to show this next to Charred, which was the dark charcoal gray linear hollow from the Halloween collection, as well as OPI's Cave the Way, which honestly I thought was the closest to being a dupe. I don't remember if that one is also described as like a black pearlescent shade, but it more or less looks like it on the nail. To be super nitpicky, I wouldn't call them exact dupes. I feel like the shade of black is a little bit different in both of them, but they are basically black pearl, so you really don't need both. And lastly for Breakfast at Monique's, here it is quickly next to Where's My Bliss, which was the teal Crelly from last summer. That one's obviously a lot more green leaning and also a lot more vibrant. When it comes to a closer dupe, especially for a jelly, I immediately thought of Cirque's Lagoon jelly. It's definitely very close, but I will say that Lagoon is a little bit more green leaning as well. And on the nail, it's also a bit more sheer. Here I'm wearing 2 coats of each, and you can see that Lagoon has more of that glassy look, while Cracked is a bit more buildable. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Cracked's new Glazed and Glossy collection, as well as the Jelly of the Month. So as always, I would love to know your thoughts on these releases because I have some mixed feelings. Starting with the Glazed and Glossy collection, objectively, I will say that I think it is great. Like the formulas, the coverage, they were so impressive. I also do appreciate that these had a fun mix of like light, soft shades with some pops of deeper colors. Like seeing a black in this collection was so unexpected, but I feel like color-wise, they are just a little bit too muted and icy, obviously because of that like pearlescent glazed look, at least for what I'm craving right now, which are like these brighter spring colors. I do think I would have liked this collection if it was released like a few months ago, especially around the time when I was doing my winter to spring transitional favorites. So that's obviously like a personal preference thing when it comes to the color. And even though this isn't like my favorite finish from Cracked, I feel like pearlescent polishes in general are just very divisive. I do appreciate that Cracked's specific take on this finish is just a lot like softer and more flattering, at least in my opinion. And then for the jelly, I mean, obviously, I think she's cute. The name is so fun, and obviously the color is beautiful. That's definitely more in line of like what I'm craving color-wise. It's just like a perfect spring shade that I feel like can also work for summer too. I don't think I would go as far as saying it's my favorite jelly that Cracked has released so far, but it definitely is up there just for like the color alone. So it just makes me excited to see more colorful, bright shades from their jelly line. So if you like either of these releases, they are going to be launching on Friday, March 28th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. As a reminder, I am an affiliate with Cracked, so I will have my discount link and code in the description box. If you use either of those, I get a small commission in return, which helps support me and my channel. So as always, a big thank you to all of you who do support me through that. But even if you don't pick anything up, I would love to know your thoughts down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!